You are Locked On Syracuse, your daily podcast on the Syracuse Orange. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Once again, the transfer portal is officially open between now and April 22nd. Here's what you need to expect from Syracuse basketball. First thing, be on alert. Be on the lookout, because technically, players that are eligible to return next season, they don't have to say publicly what they are going to do, because if they say nothing, it is assumed that they will be back with their respective team the following season. With that being said, be on alert for the statuses of JJ Starling and Donnie Freeman, whether either or both of them decide to stay, decide to go to the transfer portal, or decide to go to the NBA draft. Be on the lookout for those announcements of JJ Starling and Donnie Freeman over the next couple of days and weeks. Let's talk about position needs for Syracuse briefly. The two top needs for the Orange, in my opinion, are number one, a starting point guard, and number two, a center. There is a full podcast that we did here on Locked On Syracuse where we go more in depth about each of those needs. We also mentioned a couple of player names. That was just a couple of days ago. I do believe that Syracuse will come up with at least a starting point guard. TBD on the center position, because they're incredibly expensive and you really don't want to invest in a middle-of-the-road center. Either go for the top or go for none at all. At least that would be my strategy. Beyond that, I do expect that Syracuse adds at least a couple of wing players in the transfer portal. And I would expect that Syracuse adds at least 4 total players in the transfer portal. And here's why. If nobody else on the team at this point decides to leave, for whatever reason, they have 8 players under scholarship for next year. You got to fill up a roster at least a little bit, right? You can't go into next season with 9 or 10 players under scholarship. You probably have to get to 12. It's a stretch to say 11. So I think they have to add at least 4 transfer portal players this offseason, and I would expect that to be the case. Now let's talk about the process in which a transfer goes from just being in the portal to hopefully Syracuse basketball, right? Let's talk about interest. Expect a lot of reports to come out over the next couple of days and weeks. Something along the lines of, this player is in the transfer portal. This player has heard from the following list of schools, and Syracuse is one of those schools mentioned. If Syracuse is expressing interest in a player, that means, well, they are interested. We don't know what degree they are interested in necessarily, but we do know that if they're expressing out to someone, they're definitely interested. We already have verified reports that the Orange have expressed interest in a couple of players. Kobe McGee, transfer from Drexel, and Jakari White, a transfer from North Dakota State. I will do my best throughout the offseason to track all the players that Syracuse is interested in and hopefully be able to record a podcast for all of them, whether it's a full podcast, a mini podcast. I will do my best, but also be on the lookout for players that Syracuse is interested in. I also should point out that sometimes a player will enter the transfer portal and they have what's called a do not contact tag on them. That means that, let me be nice. It means to all the other schools out there, don't contact that person. Don't text them, don't email them, don't call them. It really means that the player already knows where they want to go. It means that there has already been tampering involved with the player. That's what it really means. Okay, so if you see a player enter the transfer portal with a do not contact tag on him and you don't see anything connected to Syracuse, there is literally no chance that that player is going to Syracuse. There's a reason why a player will enter with a do not contact tag on them. It means they already know where they are going to go. We've seen it with a couple of players already in the portal. Owen Freeman from Iowa is probably the biggest one where he already knows where he's going to go. The guy from West Virginia who's going to follow his dad to Indiana also has the do not contact tag on him because they already know where they're going to go. Beyond the interest stage, let's say Syracuse reaches out to a player and there's mutual interest, right? Well, perhaps a visit to the campus will occur. Sometimes this information will be publicly available. Sometimes it won't. For example, when you look at last year with Syracuse basketball, we knew that Eddie Lampkin was visiting Syracuse. That was publicly available for everyone to know. But I do not believe we knew that Jaquan Carlos ever visited Syracuse until after it was reported he was transferring to the Orange. I think the way it went was Carlos entered the portal and you saw that Syracuse was interested in him. And then maybe a week or two went by and lo and behold, it just comes out nowhere. It was in the morning on a Tuesday or on a Monday or a Wednesday that Carlos had committed to Syracuse. And you see the pictures after of when he visited Syracuse, it was not made public. Now, sometimes a player will visit campus and it goes great. Eddie Lampkin committed, Jaquan Carlos committed, Jair Davis committed, Lucas Taylor committed. Sometimes it can go well, but it does not mean you're going to get the player. For example, Dakota LaFew. He visited Syracuse last year, then he visited Georgia afterwards, and ultimately he committed to Georgia. So just because you get the campus visit does not mean that the player will ultimately choose to go to you. They can still go on other visits. Also, this could happen where Syracuse has a visit lined up with the player, but that player ends up canceling the visit with the team because that first visit went so well, they're just going to commit to that school. That happened in the football transfer portal window we saw in December and January. That could happen as well.